A voting study of the 2020 elections takes a look at the impact of one demographic group. We'll have the details coming up.
Plus, the USDA admits to a history of racism, how this affects black farmers here in Arizona.
And later on Break It Down, we take a look at the importance of Latinx representation in children's media.
Cronkite News starts now.
Good evening and welcome to Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Carolina Hassett.
And I'm Lauren Quinlan. Thank you for joining us.
Today, the Poor People's Campaign released the results of a study indicating that the number of voters in the 2020 presidential election was the highest in U.S. history, including low-income people. Cronkite News reporter Peyton Muse explains the critical points of the study.
The study named Awakening the Sleeping Giant indicated that of the 168 million people who voted in the last election, 58 million were low income. In Arizona, low income voters accounted for an even more significant proportion of the total vote. It was a presidential election marked by controversy. Both candidates were looking for the largest number of votes. The results of the Awakening the Sleeping Giant study say that issues important to low-income households were a big part of the election and made a difference in the voter turnout.
When these issues are actually part of the debate, you do see an uptick in the participation of poor and low-income voters.
According to Shali Gupta Barnes, having easier ways to vote allows more people to participate. Voting rights attorney PENDA says that this study serves as a roadmap for future strategies that could impact voting rates.
Those factors include a lack of discussion of issues of interest to poor people in political dialogue, a lack of candidates who run on a moral agenda.
The study defines low income as people who make less than $50,000 a year. In Arizona, more than 39% of voters fell into the low income category. Before the 2020 elections, the Poor People's Campaign launched a voter outreach drive in 16 states, reaching more than 2.1 million voters. Most were low-income eligible voters and had a higher turnout rate than voters in similar positions who were not contacted in those same states. In the broadcast center, Peyton Muse, Cronkite News.
Over the last century, black farmers have lost 90% of the farmland they owned. Much of this is due to systemic racism and biased government policy. I spoke with both the USDA and Arizona farmers to learn more about how they are working to make the business of farming more equitable. Rachel and James Stewart and their 4 children left the city a little over a year ago and made history by starting what they say is the first black-owned protein ranch in Arizona.
When we got into this, we knew that we were going to come out to the land, and we were like, what could we do? So then we thought about doing the farm, and when we couldn't find any black-owned farms, that's when we realized we had to do this even more.
In 1920, 14% of farmers were black and farmed on lands just like these. But today, according to the Census of Agriculture, black farmers like the Stewarts only make up 1.4% of farmers in the U.S. A big reason for this, farmers say, is the historical discrimination by the USDA, which provides grants, support programs, and loans for farmers across the country. One example, according to the USDA, is loan discrimination, where loan officers charge black farmers higher interest rates than white farmers. Funding was a big hurdle for the Stewarts.
Once we get over one thing, then it's the next thing, and it's the next thing. Because thinking that anybody's going to do anything for us, it's not. That's not happening, you know? So it's really, you know, creating a new system, and as we learn and grow.
The USDA has admitted to a decades-long history of systemic racism, and they are now trying to hold themselves accountable and create change.
I've been working in a cross-departmental effort to really look at where we are from a racial justice and equity standpoint, okay? And we're not sugarcoating. We are trying to find the real facts and data behind the discrepancies that exist.
That's why the USDA has appointed their first ever senior advisor for racial equity to tackle these issues.
You know, the thinking is the more information we can share with them about the true facts behind USDA, the quicker that they can give us direction and guidance on how we make improvements that are needed to achieve equity. And I think that's going to be an important part of this process.
The stewards aren't waiting for change to come, but instead, they decided to build their own network.
So we want to support other people getting into farming, getting into livestock, and normalizing it. So our main missions are food security and building diversity in food and agriculture.
They are helping other farmers find land and growing their network throughout Phoenix and the Southwest. James Stewart understands that many Black families were shut out of the opportunity to build generational wealth in the U.S., dating back to the time after slavery when former slaves were promised 40 acres, but that land either never came or was taken. Now he wants to create change for his family.
You know, and this is their education right here for our children, so they're in it. They got blood, sweat, and tears. They work hard. So by the time they're 18, as opposed to running off to college, I mean, they just start running this. And then they start making decisions, putting their input in it, putting their stamp on it, and they just continue to grow it. When they have children, then it's next thing you know, we 3 generations. So, I mean, and as long as we continue to grow and build it and stay here, it's going to make a change. And
the Southwest Black Ranchers' goal is to bring a message of hope, diversity, and equal representation to the future of food and agriculture. The USDA's Equity Commission is not yet in action, but they say they will be working with experts to provide specific feedback for agriculture programs to bring racial equity to farming.
Federal land management agencies have agreed to do more to protect the Verde River, settling a lawsuit filed by environmental groups. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service say they will begin to regularly inspect cattle grazing lands in order to protect habitats that endangered and threatened species need to survive in. A federal judge approved the agreement on Wednesday, making it the 3rd agreement this year to protect sensitive areas in the state.
The holiday season will soon be here, and depending on where you go, you may face some pandemic-related travel requirements. Cronkite News health reporter Camila Williams explains in our latest COVID Case by Case.
Today, we're talking about vaccine passports. You probably heard the phrase, but what is a vaccine passport and what do you need to do to travel, especially overseas? We'll answer those questions right now on Case by Case.
When you travel within the States, all you need is a valid ID and a mask if you're flying. But if you want to head overseas for the holiday season, you may also need proof of vaccination, or what some are calling a vaccine passport. The question we're exploring today is, just what is a vaccine passport? I talked with Willis Orlando, a travel specialist with Scott's Cheap Flights, a company that locates bargain flights for travelers. He spoke with us from Italy, where he needed a vaccine card not only to enter the country, but to go out and do things.
Folks traveling just about anywhere internationally are charged with providing some sort of proof that they're not going to bring COVID into that country, right? And so for Americans, generally what suffices as a vaccine passport is your little white CDC card. Most countries that are accepting Americans accept that card as is. You know, there have been a lot of myths and rumors about other forms of documentation that are needed. But that white CDC card is the golden ticket for Americans. Again, I'm sitting here in Italy right now where I needed my vaccine card not only to enter the country, but also to do day-to-day activities. If I want to go eat inside somewhere, I need to show my vaccine card. If I want to go to a concert, to a gym, any sort of thing like this, I need to show my vaccine card. And so it's really important to keep it safe.
Orlando recommends keeping your card in an airtight bag to avoid damage and says don't laminate it because if you need a booster down the road, you won't be able to update your card. In the U.S., some places will accept digital proof. Several states are introducing apps to allow vaccine records to be uploaded and be easily shown at certain events. Other states have banned digital records. In Arizona, Governor Doug Ducey has prohibited vaccine passports, meaning public entities cannot require residents to provide vaccine status. So what happens if you are returning to the U.S.? You need to show proof of a negative COVID test no more than 3 days before your flight. That applies to all air passengers ages 2 and up, including U.S. citizens. Additional information can be obtained on airline websites and on the cdc.gov website. In the broadcast studio, Camila Williams, Cronkite News.
The White House today released a comprehensive strategy to address climate change and pave the way for what it calls a climate-resilient economy. But as Kimberly Silverio Bautista reports from our Washington bureau, that is not enough to satisfy protesters.
Hundreds of demonstrators marched down Pennsylvania Avenue this morning, demanding that President Joe Biden declare climate change an emergency.
We're asking him to stop the fossil fuels projects and declare a national climate emergency. And the very important part of that, we need for our President Biden to be bold in creating restorative justice.
Donna Hoffman came from Texas to join the People versus Fossil Fuels demonstrations, which have been going on every day since Monday. The protests drew environmental and tribal groups from across the nation, including 11-year-old Love Hopkins, a Native American youth from North Dakota, who said many indigenous people feel betrayed by Biden.
We voted for him for a reason, because we trusted him. And he betrayed us. We're tired of all the lies. We're tired of all of it. That's why we're here in D.C., to let him know that we're still here.
The demonstration ended up here at the west front of the Capitol for more speeches, and where some of the demonstrators plan to get arrested. Demonstrators stood in the middle of Pennsylvania Avenue and 3rd Street, then sat down in the intersection where they were arrested without incident. It was more a peaceful encounter than Thursday, when some protesters clashed with police as Native activists staged a sit-in at the lobby of the Interior Department. Hoffman thinks the protests are needed, but that Biden should act without having to be prodded by demonstrations like this.
Well, we want him to take bold action to be the climate president that he wants to be before Glasgow. So he can do a lot with the stroke of a pen.
In Washington, Kimberly Silverio Bautista, Cronkite News.
We've been spoiled with cold temperatures lately, and even more outdoor-friendly weather is on its way. Ivan Liss is in the Weather Center with more.
Looking at the big picture, we have breezy conditions prevailing across the southwestern part of the country right now, affecting our state and especially Southern California, where we have this basically in the Great Basin region, we have this big cold air mass right now, and that's spawning some really strong offshore Santa Ana wildfire winds for Southern coastal California, affecting places like Los Angeles and San Diego into tomorrow. For us, though, we have a pretty nice weekend on tap. High pressure moving in off the coast. That'll help warm up our temperatures to the low 90s before we have a storm system coming through. It's going to mainly affect the upper parts of the Intermountain West, but it's going to bring really nice mild conditions. You got to wait for the 8-day forecast to check out these temperatures for the beginning of next week. And then that low pressure system moves out, high pressure moves back in, warming us up for the later part of next week. I talked about those breezy conditions. Our weather models right now showing tomorrow morning the biggest threat is probably for the south central part of the state, Casa Grande, seeing 19-mile-per-hour winds. Those are just sustained wind. The wind gusts will be higher than that. After that, the wind threat in the later part of the weekend moves up to the northwestern part of our state. It's a three-part story for the 8-day forecast. We have a warm-up this weekend, as I said before. We have that storm system move through, pushing down our temperatures to some really nice temperatures, 83 degrees on Tuesday, before high pressure moves back in at the latter part of next week, pushing us up to 92 degrees on Friday. I'm Evan Liss in the Cronkite News Weather Center.
I'm Isabella Duran, and coming up after the break, I'll have your Cronkite Sports Report. The latest honor for Jerry Colangelo and how the sports executive is giving back to the Valley.
She's the White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour.
It has been a historic and traumatic week in Washington, D.C.
Former reporter for the New York Times, political analyst for NBC, and multimedia journalist at USA Today.
Join me this week and every week for a critical look at this week's top news stories.
Yamiche Alcindor, the new moderator of Washington Week.
Friday nights at 7 on Arizona PBS.
Welcome back. I'm Isabella Duran, and here's your Cronkite Sports Report. Game 3 of the WNBA Finals is just minutes away, and the Mercury are looking to take control of the series against the Sky in Chicago. Before tonight's action, a couple of Mercury players received honors for their play this season. Guard Skylar Diggins-Smith and center Brittany Griner were named to the All-WNBA First Team. It is the third time for both players to have been selected. They joined Breanna Stewart and Jewel Lloyd from the Seattle Storm and Connecticut's John Cole Jones. The Coyotes opened the season with a tough loss in Columbus last night, falling 8-2 to the Blue Jackets. The 6-goal margin is the worst opening day loss in team history, but the Coyotes will not let one bad game ruin their focus.
A tough game, but it's the first game of the year. We did some good things, a couple breakdowns there in the second period, and it's in the back of our net. So you learn from it, and the game's over. There's nothing we can do about it. We got 81 more games, so on to the next one. And
Jerry Colangelo has a name synonymous with Arizona sports, but he has now turned his attention to giving back. Cronkite News reporter Jaden Sormani has more on how the sports exec is helping students build integrity.
Jerry Colangelo is known in the Valley as one of the greatest executives in Arizona sports. At a recent luncheon, he was honored for over 50 years of golden achievements. But his greatest accomplishment might lie with the Integrity Summit and Scholarship he started. 10 years ago, Colangelo interviewed college students across Arizona about integrity, and the results surprised him.
They basically admitted they took shortcuts where they could or when they felt it was necessary in their best interests. And that was a little bit disturbing, to me in particular. And I said, we need to do something about that.
Colangelo started the Integrity Scholarship Endowment as well as the Integrity Summit in hopes of providing Arizonans with an opportunity for education. Suns owner Robert Sarver and Suns Charities donated $15,000 to the endowment.
When money could be raised to get some people through, give them an education who might otherwise never have gotten an opportunity to go to school. I can relate to that. I was moved and touched by the fact that Robert made a decision to support.
At the conclusion of this year's summit, Colangelo was recognized for his contributions to the Valley. But Colangelo wants people to know he couldn't have done it without having one fundamental value.
If you have integrity, it doesn't get any better. If you don't have integrity, you have a long way to go.
At the Integrity Summit in Phoenix, Jaden Sormani, Cronkite News.
And that's going to do it for your Cronkite Sports Report. Let's go back to you, Carolina and Lauren.
That's it for Cronkite News tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.